Imagine it's 1965. The air smells faintly of floor wax, popcorn, and quiet desperation. You are wandering the aisles of a brand new retail cathedral called Kmart, minding your own business, perhaps admiring a lovely set of polyester curtains. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts. A siren cuts through the elevator music. A police light starts spinning on a stick in the middle of the automotive department. In any other context, you would assume there was a nuclear drill or a hostage situation. But here, it meant something far more critical was happening. It meant motor oil was 15 cents off for the next 10 minutes. You watch as polite society instantly collapses. Sweet grandmothers throw elbows. Grown men sprint toward the flashing beacon like moths to a very cheap, very synthetic flame. This was the blue light special, the most effective Pavlovian experiment in history, turning suburban shoppers into gladiators over a discount toaster. But how did a flashing police light become the heartbeat of American consumerism? And why did we all collectively agree to lose our minds for the thrill of the hunt? If you want to receive more stories about the bizarre history of retail like this one, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, because we are about to walk the aisles of the store that taught America how to shop until it hurt. To understand the absolute psychological hold that a spinning police light held over the American populace, we first have to scrub our brains of the modern retail experience. Forget the frictionless, soulless tap of a smartphone screen where a cardboard box magically appears at your door 2 days later. That is too easy. That lacks the visceral thrill of the hunt. We need to go back to the early 1960s, a time when convenience was a brand new concept and the American suburbs were exploding outward like a supernova of crabgrass and chain-link fences. In this era, shopping was traditionally a stiff, formal affair. You went downtown. You put on a hat. You spoke to a clerk who looked at you with mild disdain if you asked for something as vulgar as a discount. But then, the tectonic plates of capitalism shifted, and out of the fissure crawled a beast that would change everything. That beast was the discount department store, and its king was a man named Harry Cunningham. Harry wasn't interested in the romance of retail. He was interested in volume. He looked at the five and dime stores, like SS Kresge, which were quaint and slow, and he decided they were dead. He realized that the post-war American family didn't want quality service. They wanted a mountain of cheap stuff, and they wanted it right now. So, in 1962, the same holy year that birthed Walmart and Target, though nobody noticed them yet because they were mere blips on the radar, Cunningham launched the first Kmart in Garden City, Michigan. It was a revelation. It was a warehouse of dreams disguised as a fluorescent-lit purgatory. It was designed to be a machine where you walked in with a paycheck and walked out with a cart full of things you didn't know existed 10 minutes prior, but simply having low prices wasn't enough. Cunningham and his team knew that the American shopper in the 1960s was a restless creature. They needed stimulation. They needed a game. They needed to feel like they were winning something, even if the prize was just a discount on bulk tube socks. This is where the genius, or perhaps the accidental madness, of the blue light special enters the narrative. It didn't start as a high-level corporate strategy cooked up by guys in gray flannel suits smoking Lucky Strikes in a boardroom. Like all great chaotic inventions, it was born out of a desperate need to get rid of garbage. The legend goes that a store manager named Earl Harkins was staring at a surplus of merchandise that wasn't moving. It was just sitting there, mocking him, taking up valuable floor space. In a moment of inspiration that rivals Newton and the Apple, Harkins decided he needed to draw attention to this stagnant pile of inventory. He didn't just put up a sign. A sign is passive. A sign is easily ignored. He needed urgency. He grabbed a flashing police light, the kind you'd see on a squad car chasing down a bank robber, mounted it on a pole, and shoved it into the middle of the aisle. The effect was instantaneous and electric. The flashing blue light cut through the haze of the store like a beacon calling ships to a rocky shore. It signaled an emergency, but a good kind of emergency. It triggered a primal part of the suburban brain that said, something is happening over there, and if I am not there, I am losing. Shoppers who had been casually browsing the lawn and garden section suddenly dropped their rakes and sprinted toward the light. It was Pavlovian conditioning at its finest. The light meant a deal, and the deal was fleeting. It was the 1960s version of a flash sale, but instead of clicking a button, you had to physically maneuver a shopping cart with one squeaky wheel through a phalanx of grandmothers to claim your prize. The items being peddled under the blue glow were rarely things anyone actually needed. That was the beauty of it. We are talking about the dregs of the inventory, the misfit toys of retail. It might be a stack of vinyl tablecloths in a color that science hadn't named yet. It might be Easter candy in July. It might be a pallet of motor oil sitting next to a bin of ladies' undergarments. It didn't matter. The context was irrelevant. The price was the god. For 15 minutes, that specific item was the most important object in the world. The store manager would get on the PA system, that crackling, nasally voice of authority, and announce, "Attention Kmart shoppers," a phrase that would eventually become as ingrained in the cultural lexicon as the Pledge of Allegiance. He would announce the location of the blue light, and the herd would migrate. It was a beautiful, chaotic ballet of consumerism. By the mid-60s, this wasn't just a sales tactic, it was a sport. Families would pile into their massive station wagons, vehicles the size of small yachts that got 8 miles to the gallon, and head to Kmart not just to shop, but to see what the blue light would offer up to them. It was entertainment. In a decade defined by the space race, the Cold War, and social upheaval, the Kmart aisle was a safe harbor where the only conflict was who grabbed the last discounted toaster. The sarcasm of the situation is palpable when you look back at it. We were a society terrified of nuclear annihilation, yet we found comfort in a flashing siren inside a department store because it meant we could save 30 cents on wrapping paper. If you are finding yourself fascinated by this descent into the madness of retro retail history and want to ensure you get more stories like this delivered to you, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because we are really just scratching the surface of how these stores rewired our brains. The success of the Blue Light Special in those early years proved something vital to the executives. Dignity had a price tag, and it was surprisingly low. People loved the spontaneity. The store felt alive. It wasn't a static museum of goods, it was a shifting landscape of opportunity. You couldn't just walk in with a list and stick to it. The blue light destroyed the list. The blue light laughed at your budget. This phenomenon also cemented Kmart's aesthetic as the anti-snob store. While other department stores were trying to maintain a veneer of class with glass counters and polite staff, Kmart embraced the chaos. The floors were linoleum, polished to a lethal shine. The smell was a distinct mixture of floor wax, popcorn from the snack bar, and the off-gassing of cheap plastic toys. And cutting through it all was that siren. It's important to note that in the 60s, the blue light wasn't always a sophisticated mobile unit. Sometimes it was a guy carrying the light on a stick, trailing an extension cord behind him like a tail, looking for an outlet near the clearance bin. It was low-tech, gritty, and incredibly effective. It turned shopping into a scavenger hunt, where the prize was usually something you'd regret buying 3 hours later. But the sheer volume of merchandise moved during these 15-minute windows was staggering. It taught Americans to buy on impulse. Before this, you saved up for things. You planned. Kmart and the blue light taught us to react. It tapped into the fear of missing out decades before social media existed. If you didn't grab that bag of discounted charcoal right now, the light would go off, the price would go back up, and you would be the fool who paid full retail. And in the economy of the 1960s, suburban survivalist, paying full retail was the ultimate sin. As the decade wore on, the blue light became the heartbeat of the store, a pulsing rhythm that dictated the flow of traffic and money, turning Kmart into the undisputed heavyweight champion of the discount world, leaving competitors in the dust, wondering why their polite, quiet stores were empty, while the place with the spinning police light was printing money. As the 1960s marched onward, trading the innocence of the early decade for the psychedelic confusion of the latter half, Kmart was busy achieving something akin to world domination, or at least the domination of every strip mall located near a new highway exit. The Blue Light Special was no longer just a quirky experiment by a rogue manager. It was the fuel in the engine of a retail juggernaut that was expanding faster than the waistlines of the people eating at the in-store cafeteria. And we must talk about that dominance, because to understand the tragedy that comes later, you have to understand the absolute arrogance of the peak. By the time the moon landing was being faked or filmed, depending on your level of 1960s paranoia, Kmart was opening a new store essentially every other day. It was a viral infection of brick and mortar, spreading across the landscape, turning farm fields into parking lots and replacing local culture with the universal language of discount pricing. The experience of entering a Kmart in this golden era was a sensory assault that modern shoppers, with their sanitized minimalist boutiques, simply cannot comprehend. You didn't just walk into Kmart, you were absorbed by it. The air was a distinct, uncopyable cocktail of roasted nuts from the snack bar, the ozone tang of cheap electronics, and the chemical off-gassing of miles of synthetic apparel. And right in the center of this consumerist hurricane was the blue light, the spinning eye of the storm. It had evolved from a simple sales tactic into a form of mass hypnosis. It created a conditioning so powerful that if you rang a bell and flashed a blue light in a suburban neighborhood at 2 a.m., half the block would likely wake up and instinctively reach for their wallets. The genius of the system was that it turned the act of spending money into a sport, a competitive event where the opponent was your neighbor and the playing field was a linoleum floor slick with spilled slushies. But let's look closer at what was actually happening under that strobe light, because this is where the sarcasm of the American dream really starts to curdle. The items being pushed weren't just deals. They were often artifacts of a culture that was rapidly losing its taste. We are talking about the peak era of avocado green and harvest gold, colors that nature produces only in moments of distress, yet Kmart convinced millions of people that their kitchens needed to look like the inside of a bruised vegetable. The blue light would start spinning, and the voice on the PA would announce a special on polyester leisure suits, garments so flammable that standing too close to a radiator was considered an extreme sport, and people bought them. They bought them in droves. The blue light special didn't just move inventory, it validated bad decisions. It whispered to the consumer, yes, you do need a fondue set that you will use exactly once before putting it in the attic for 40 years. And you need it because it is 30% off right now. This creates a fascinating paradox, a twist in the narrative that most business historians gloss over because they are too busy looking at the profit margins. The twist is this: the blue light special, while building the Kmart empire, was simultaneously poisoning the well. It was the moment the brand stopped being a store and started being a circus. In the short term, it was brilliant. It created urgency. It kept people in the store longer, wandering the aisles like zombies waiting for the next hit of dopamine from the siren. But in the long term, it was etching a very specific message into the collective consciousness of the public. It taught America that Kmart was the place for cheap things, not good things. It was the place you went for the impulsive, the disposable, the junk. While Sears was still trying to sell you a washing machine that would last until the heat death of the universe, Kmart was selling you a toaster that might last until Tuesday, but hey, it came with a free bag of marshmallows if you bought it during the special. This distinction is crucial. The blue light special was training the customer to undervalue the merchandise. It gamified the shopping experience to such a degree that the product itself became secondary to the thrill of the capture. You weren't buying a garden hose, you were winning the garden hose event. This meant that Kmart could never really move up market. They had painted themselves into a corner with a brush made of discount pricing. They were the kings of the bottom dollar, a precarious throne to sit on because there is always someone willing to go lower. The management in the late 60s didn't see this as a problem, of course. Why would they? They were printing money. They were the only game in town. They looked at the chaotic scrums of housewives fighting over discounted towels and saw loyalty. They didn't realize they were looking at an addiction to a gimmick, not loyalty to a brand. And let's not forget the sheer absurdity of the in-store environment that supported this madness. This was the era of the K-Grill, or the Kmart cafeteria, a culinary establishment that operated with the same philosophy as the retail floor: quantity over quality, speed over survival. You could, in the span of a single hour, buy a rifle, a goldfish, a spare tire, and a grilled cheese sandwich that had the structural integrity of a damp sponge, all under one roof. The blue light special would occasionally even extend to the food. Imagine the scene. The siren goes off near the deli counter. Attention Kmart shoppers, for the next 10 minutes, hot dogs are 4 for $1. The stampede that would ensue is the stuff of nightmares. A herd of polyester-clad grazers migrating toward the scent of processed meat. It was glorious. It was disgusting. It was the peak of American efficiency. However, as the 60s bled into the 70s, a subtle shift began to occur, a crack in the foundation that the flashing light tried to blind everyone to. The thrill of the hunt began to morph into the shame of the purchase. The blue light special had been so effective at associating Kmart with cheap that the brand began to lose its dignity. It became the punchline of late-night comedians. To shop at Kmart was to admit defeat in the game of capitalism. You went there because you had to, or because you needed something that didn't matter. The blue light, once a beacon of opportunity, started to look a bit like a warning light on a dashboard. It was signaling that the engine was running hot, that the whole enterprise was built on the shaky ground of constant, relentless stimulation. The executives, blinded by the strobe effect of their own success, missed the fact that a new competitor was watching them from Arkansas. A man named Sam Walton was taking notes. He saw the blue light special and he didn't see a genius marketing ploy. He saw a distraction. He saw a company that was relying on theatrics to move merchandise because their logistics were messy and their inventory control was chaotic. While Kmart was busy putting on a show with sirens and microphones, waiting for Earl to plug the light into the wall, the competition was building a silent, deadly efficient machine that wouldn't need a flashing light to tell you the prices were low, because the prices would always be low. But in 1969, nobody at Kmart cared about Sam Walton. They were too busy celebrating the fact that they had just sold out of plastic lawn flamingos in record time. The party was raging, the music was loud, and the blue light was spinning, casting long dancing shadows over an empire that was unknowingly celebrating its own future obsolescence. The trap was set, not for the customers this time, but for Kmart itself. They had trained the world to expect a circus, and now they were forced to be the clowns forever. The sheer gravitational pull of the blue light special in the late 1960s had created a reality distortion field that few could escape, a sort of Bermuda Triangle of budgeting where money vanished and was replaced by objects of questionable utility. By the time the decade was preparing to crash into the malaise of the 1970s, the Kmart experience had calcified into a very specific, very loud, and very bright cultural ritual. It was no longer just a store, it was the town square for a society that had decided community centers were boring and what they really needed was a place to buy motor oil and pantyhose at the same time. But as we peel back the layers of this retail onion, and trust me, it smells just as pungent, we start to see the structural cracks that the flashing light was desperately trying to blind us to. The thrill of the hunt was beginning to curdle into something far more desperate, an addiction to the noise itself. Consider the logistics of the blue light special at its absolute peak. It was a masterpiece of analog chaos in a world that was just beginning to dream of digital order. There was no algorithm deciding what went on sale. There was no central computer in Troy, Michigan, calculating the optimal price point to maximize yield. No, it was usually a department manager named Bob who looked at a pallet of unloved lime green ceramic frogs and thought, "I need this gone before the district manager walks in on Tuesday." Bob would radio the front desk. The announcement would crackle over the speakers like a thunderclap from a very discount Zeus, and the mobile light unit, a rolling cart that looked like it was stolen from a hospital ward and retrofitted by a mad scientist, would be wheeled into position. The physicality of it was absurd. You had a human being physically pushing a siren through a crowd of people who were vibrating with anticipation. It was retail theater performed by amateur actors for an audience that was ready to riot for a 20% markdown. This reliance on human intuition and gut feeling was Kmart's superpower, but it was also the poison in the chalice. Because the blue light special worked so well, it masked the fact that the store was often a logistical nightmare. The back rooms of these Kmarts were legendary labyrinths of cardboard and confusion. Inventory control was essentially a guessing game, but who cared if you couldn't find the size 10 work boots? The blue light was spinning over in housewares, and they were practically giving away fondue forks. The flashing light became a crutch, a dazzling distraction that allowed Kmart to ignore the boring, unsexy work of actually organizing a supply chain. They were the rock stars of retail, trashing the hotel room and partying all night, while down in Arkansas, Sam Walton was the nerd in the library studying for the final exam. And as we all know from high school movies, the nerd eventually wins, usually by buying the rock star's recording contract when they go bankrupt. But in the late 60s, the party was still raging, and the sarcasm of the consumer experience was reaching new heights. The products that the blue light highlighted were often a testament to the era's complete lack of taste. We are talking about the golden age of synthetic materials, where natural fibers were viewed with suspicion. The blue light would descend upon racks of clothing made of polyester so thick and impermeable that it could arguably stop a low-caliber bullet. Parents would dress their children in these garments, purchased under the strobe light's glow, sending them off to school looking like miniature, flammable couches. The Trax shoes, the Kmart house brand, became the ultimate symbol of this duality. To buy them during a blue light special was a victory for the wallet, but a defeat for the social standing of the child who had to wear them. The blue light didn't just sell products, it sold a compromise. It said, "You can have this thing, and it will function, but you will never love it, and it will never love you back." As the 1970s approached, bringing with them inflation, gas shortages, and a general sense that the American joyride was running out of fuel, the blue light special transformed from a fun game into a grim necessity. The thrill started to feel a lot more like panic. When the price of meat skyrocketed, the blue light special on canned ham wasn't a quirky bonus. It was a lifeline. Kmart had accidentally positioned itself as the bunker for the economic downturn. But because they had built their entire identity around the special, around the gimmick of the flashing light, they had trained their customers to never, ever pay full price. They had created a monster, the deal hunter. This shopper was ruthless. They would wander the aisles for hours, ignoring the regularly priced merchandise, waiting like a sniper for the siren to wail. If the light didn't spin, the wallets didn't open. Kmart had cannibalized its own margins in pursuit of volume, addicted to the adrenaline spike of the 15-minute rush, ignoring the long, slow bleed that occurred the rest of the day. And let's talk about the aesthetic of the store during this peak chaos era, because it sets the stage for the inevitable fall. Kmart didn't believe in renovation. They believed in expansion. If a floor tile cracked, you put a rug over it. If a light ballast started buzzing like a trapped hornet, you turned up the muzak. The stores began to feel worn out even when they were relatively new. The blue light, once a beacon of modern marketing, started to look like a warning flare at a car wreck. It highlighted the dinginess. When that harsh, spinning light hit the shelves, it didn't make the merchandise look magical. It made it look interrogational. It exposed the dust on the boxes of knockoff blenders. It illuminated the scratches on the linoleum. But the executives were too high up in their towers to see the dust. They were looking at the sales figures, which were still massive, bloated by the sheer footprint of the company. They were opening stores so fast they barely had time to staff them, let alone manage them. The ultimate irony, the twist of the knife that would eventually gut the company, was that Kmart thought the blue light special was their brand's greatest asset, when in reality, it was their greatest liability. It branded them as cheap, in a way that is hard to wash off. Target, which started the same year, took a different path. They decided to be discount chic. They wanted to be the store where you bought a cheap lamp that looked like an expensive lamp. Kmart, via the blue light, screamed, "This is a cheap lamp. Look at it. It's 99 cents. Grab it before it falls apart." They leaned into the garbage. They embraced the schlock. And for a while, we loved them for it. We loved the lack of pretension. We loved the honesty of a store that admitted, "Look, we know you're only here because you need a spatula and a bag of soil, so let's make a game out of it." But games have to end. The crowd eventually gets tired. The novelty wears off. By the time the 70s were in full swing, the blue light special was becoming a caricature of itself. It was the drunk uncle at the wedding who thinks he's still the life of the party, but everyone else is just checking their watches. The competition was sharpening their knives. Walmart was building a logistical empire that could offer everyday low prices without the need for a siren or a guy named Earl running around with a light bulb on a stick. Kmart was playing checkers with a strobe light in their eyes, while Sam Walton was playing 4D chess in a silent room. The trap was set. The customers were trained to expect a circus, but the circus tent was starting to leak. The clowns were looking tired, and the ringmaster was about to realize that he had sold all the tickets at a loss. The light was still spinning, cutting through the smoky haze of the store, but the shadows it cast were getting longer and darker, and they were beginning to take the shape of a massive, smiley-faced destroyer. As the dust settles on the chaotic, polyester-clad fever dream that was the 1960s retail explosion, we are left staring at the inevitable hangover of the blue light special. It is a hangover that lasted for decades, a slow-motion headache that throbbed to the rhythm of a flickering fluorescent bulb. You see, the tragedy of Kmart isn't that they failed to sell us things, it's that they succeeded too well at selling us the wrong idea. They sold us on the concept that shopping should be an adrenaline sport, a frantic scramble for resources in a linoleum arena. But as the 60s faded into history, the American consumer began to change. We got tired, we got cynical. The thrill of the hunt, which had once felt like a suburban safari, started to feel more like a chore. The blue light, once a beacon of hope for the budget-conscious, began to look suspiciously like the light of an anglerfish, a lure dangling in the dark, attached to a monster that just wanted to eat your paycheck and leave you with a cart full of regret. The ultimate irony of the blue light special strategy was that it trained a generation of shoppers to be fundamentally disloyal. This is the fatal flaw in the 60s logic of flash sales. By teaching us that the only time to buy a blender was when the siren was screaming, Kmart inadvertently taught us that the blender had no intrinsic value. Its value was entirely dependent on a gimmick. If the light wasn't spinning, the price was a lie. This created a customer base of mercenaries, We weren't Kmart loyalists, we were blue light opportunists. As soon as a competitor arrived who offered low prices without the need for a theatrical performance, someone like the relentlessly boring but efficient Sam Walton, we defected. We traded the excitement of the siren for the stability of the everyday low price. It turns out, in the long run, people prefer saving money quietly to saving money while being shouted at by a department manager over a crackling PA system. And let's be brutally honest about the legacy of the environment Kmart cultivated. By doubling down on the bargain bin aesthetic of the 1960s, they cemented their reputation as the store of last resort. While Target was busy gentrifying itself into Target, selling the illusion of European design to the middle class, Kmart remained stubbornly, almost proudly, stuck in 1965. They kept the popcorn smell. They kept the industrial lighting. They kept the vibe of a warehouse where something had recently gone wrong. The blue light special became a symbol of this stagnation. It was a relic of a time when we were easily amused, a flashing trinket for a society that had since moved on to more sophisticated forms of consumerism. To walk into a Kmart in its twilight years was to walk into a museum of the 1960s mindset. A place where volume still trumped quality and noise was mistaken for excitement. There is a profound, sarcastic sadness in realizing that the blue light was the heartbeat of an organism that didn't know it was dying. It kept spinning, kept flashing, kept calling out to shoppers who were increasingly looking at their watches and heading toward the exit. The executives, trapped in their high-rise towers, couldn't hear the silence growing between the announcements. They didn't realize that the thrill of the hunt had been replaced by the convenience of the click. The chaotic energy of the 60s, which birthed the concept, was the very thing that made it impossible for Kmart to adapt to the streamlined, sterile future of retail. They were a jazz band trying to play in a library. They were a messy, loud, human experience in a world that was rapidly automating the humanity out of everything. So, what are we left with? We are left with the ghost of a siren. If you close your eyes and listen closely to the silence of a modern, empty parking lot where a Kmart used to stand, you can almost hear it. You can hear the static of the microphone. You can hear the squeak of the manager's special cart, that rickety chariot of discount dreams rolling across the tiles. You can smell the faint aroma of a subpar hot dog and floor wax. The Blue Light Special was the ultimate expression of mid-century American capitalism, loud, bright, slightly tacky, and completely irresistible. It was a lie, of course, the idea that buying a discount toaster would make you happy, but it was a beautiful, flashing lie. It brought us together. It made us run. It made us feel, for 15 glorious minutes, that we were winners in a game that was rigged from the start. We have traded that chaos for efficiency. We have traded the blue light for Amazon Prime. We no longer have to fight a grandmother for a discounted towel. We just tap a screen and wait. It is cleaner, it is faster, it is objectively better, but it is also painfully boring. There is no story in clicking buy now. There is no adrenaline in a cardboard box. We killed the blue light because we grew up, and in doing so, we lost the last great retail circus. Kmart and its spinning police light were the wild, unruly teenagers of the shopping world, and we eventually evicted them to make room for the adults. But admit it, you miss the noise. You miss the possibility that at any moment a light might start spinning and chaos might erupt. If you have enjoyed this sarcastic, nostalgic, and slightly tragic journey through the aisles of retail history, and you want to make sure you don't miss out on future stories that explore the bizarre cultural phenomena that shaped our lives, then you need to do the one thing the blue light always wanted you to do. Take action. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. Don't wait for a siren to tell you to do it. Subscribe, leave a like, and join us for the next story, because history is full of flashing lights, and we are going to chase every single one of them.